Hey, how's it going? I'm Seth, and this is my Dinosaur Discover deck that I made a couple nights ago, and I just want to show it off for you guys. So, here's the commander, Pantlaza Sunfavored, and he has whenever he or another dinosaur I control enters, I discover X, where X is the creature's toughness. So, if I play Pantlaza, I will discover 4 because 4 is his toughness, and that means that I'll exile cards from the top of my library until I get a spell with mana value 4 or less, and then I can either cast that immediately or put it into my hand, and then all of the rest of the cards go into the bottom of my library in a random order, which is pretty good. You basically get 2 spells for the price of 1, and it's kind of busted. I played it last night with my brothers, and I had a pretty crazy board state, a lot of stuff going everywhere, but anyways, I'm just going to get right into it. Some pretty good pieces right here are the ramp, just getting, lands out. We got Kodama's Reach and Grow from the Ashes, just getting that plains and mountain and forest out however much you can before you start playing bigger and bigger stuff, so you get better and better discover costs. Next up, we got some protection. For protection, I've got Fog of War. I've also got another spell in here that does kind of the same thing. It's Eerie Interference, which is you and creatures you control don't take damage from creatures, so it's pretty good whether you're being swung at or if you're swinging and you don't want your guys to die. But Fog of War gives you 1 life for each creature on the battlefield, not just your own, so, if somebody else is playing tokens or somebody else just has a lot of creatures out, you get a pretty good value for this. Then you got Marisi, Breaker of the Coil. Now, he's going to make sure that your opponents aren't doing stuff during your combat phases. That's really important. So not even just during your combat phases either. It says during combat, so they can't even cast stuff during their combat phases. And then we got Scytheclaw Raptor, which whenever it's not your turn and you cast a spell, you're going to take 4 damage. Now, it doesn't seem that bad, but if you're playing against an Izzet deck or somebody playing stacks who's controlling you, then this is a very, very important piece to have, because this is going to protect you a lot and either disengage them from you or just, slowly ping them away, which is pretty important to have. Next up, we got some life gain pieces. So we just got a spell right here, Heliod's Intervention. Now, you can either, this is also a destruction spell. You can either get rid of some artifacts and enchantments you don't want, or you can gain twice X life, and ideally, you'll have a decent bit of mana up. Maybe you have a turn where you can't play a dinosaur you can't discover, so you just pump your mana into a spell like this, and hey, you get some pretty good life gain out of it. Then we got Verdant Sun's Avatar and Tristani Selesnia's Voice. Now, both of these do pretty much the same thing. Whenever this or another creature enters, and whenever off of this another creature enters, you gain life equal to its toughness. So if you have both of these guys out, which I did my first or second time playing this deck, and you play Pantlaza, let's say, from your command zone, or you bounce Pantlaza back to hand and you play him, you'll gain 8 life just off of the 4 from here and just off of the 4 from here. That's pretty good. I mean, you get a discover trigger as well as you gain that much life. That's pretty good. And even just on their own, it's good life gain to have. I mean, it's nothing crazy, but over time it'll build up. And with however many creatures that I have in this deck, I think I've got like 30 dinosaurs on the dot, not including Pantlaza. So that's a pretty good chunk of creatures anyways. You're going to be gaining a lot of life. Next up, let's go to some recursion. So for recursion, we've got Cosmic Rebirth and Hardness Stubborn. Now, this guy is just going to get you any permanent card from your graveyard back to your hand, whether that's a cave that you want to discover with again, because there's some land cards that you can actually pay to discover, or you want to get back a big dinosaur that you just lost. It'll go into hand, but if it's a cheap enough card, it'll actually go right onto the battlefield, which could possibly trigger Pantlaza again, which is still pretty good. And then we got Hardness Stubborn. Now, he's only with artifacts and enchantments, but he's still pretty good. Dinosaur, 4-drop for 5, so you get a 5 discover, which is pretty good. And whenever he deals damage, you can return an artifact or enchantment from graveyard back to the battlefield. Maybe somebody salty destroyed your soul ring. It's happened to me way too many times, and you just want that mana back. Hit him with Hardness Stubborn, you get it right back. Hey, it works out. Next up, we've got some bouncing. So we got Light the Way, which also can work as a buff spell. You put a 1/1 counter on target creature or vehicle and untap it, or return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. Now, this can work in a few ways. You can either bounce stuff that you already have. So let's say you have Mischievous Pup out and you bounce something else, and then bounce Mischievous Pup back, and then you get that back, and then maybe you could just keep doing that again. I don't know. But this is basically just for if you have no dinosaurs in hand or you're not sure if you're going to be able to discover, for 1 mana, bouncing something back to hand just to cast it again and get that discover trigger, it's pretty good. Same thing with Princess Takes Flight. When she enters, you'll exile a target creature, and it works whether you're trying to, get rid of something on your opponent's board for a little while, but they will come back in 2 turns. So I would recommend using it on something on your board, because it's like, oh, get rid of something, it's going to come back, trigger that discover again off of Pantlaza, and I think it's pretty good. You also get a +2/+2 and flying until end of turn on a target creature, which is solid in little to no flyers deck. And then, like I said, Mischievous Pup, it's flash, and then you do the same thing. You just return something you control to its owner's hand. So maybe you have some open mana at the end of your opponent's turn, and it's about to pass to you. You play this guy quick, bounce back Pantlaza, play him next turn, get that discover trigger. It all works out. Next, we've got some important like buffing, buff creatures, like anthems for the deck. So we got War Leader's Call. Each creature gets 1/1, and whenever a creature enters under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is really, really good ping damage. You're not making a bunch of tokens, but that's fine because you are playing a bunch of creatures. So usually each turn it's like 2 or 3 damage, and it will build up over time. It's very good to have. Rhythm of the Wild. Make sure that you can't your creature spells cannot be countered. So, if I play something like Galta and Maverin or Galta Primal Hunger, they can't say no to that. And then also they enter either with haste or a +1/+1 counter, which is great because with haste, then you can either, have a dinosaur enter and then choose it to attack that turn, or you can have it enter, give it a +1/+1 counter, and then Pantlaza will actually see that +1/+1 counter, and it doesn't work off of base power toughness. It'll work off of just the toughness that it is. So if you have it enter with a +1/+1 counter and then have Pantlaza trigger, then you'll actually get an additional discover because it sees that +1/+1 counter, and that it adds to the toughness of the creature. We have Citadel Siege, which is just a buff. You can either tap your opponent's creatures at the beginning of combat, or you can choose to put 2 counters onto a creature at combat. It's just a little bit of a buff. Even if you don't swing with the creature, buffing up for blockers, it's pretty good. Grumgully kind of does the same thing that Rhythm of the Wild does, but no haste. So whenever a non-human enters under your control, you put an additional +1/+1 counter on it, and that's awesome because just like Rhythm of the Wild, if you have Pantlaza and then Grumgully trigger, well, technically Grumgully will trigger on top of Pantlaza, but anyways, Pantlaza will see the +1/+1 counter that Grumgully put on that creature, and it will add to the discover value, which is awesome. And then finally, Semester's End. It's another bounce spell, but it still works for buff. You can exile your entire board, say, bring them back with a +1/+1 counter, and you still could possibly get a discover trigger off of that. It's also good for protection in general. Just, if somebody targets your stuff, exile it, bounces back, maybe stronger, pretty good. We've got some important pieces of the deck. So we've got Welcome To, and this is a saga that will become, oh, my light turned off. This is a saga that will at first turn something into, if you have a nasty artifact that you don't like, you just turn that into a wall, and then in a couple turns, you'll actually destroy that thing. And if anybody's playing Walls deck, you'll also destroy that. But you have a creature, you have an opponent, you turn a non-creature artifact an opponent controls into a wall, and then on your second one, you'll create a 3/3 dinosaur with trample. It can haste until end of turn. And then finally, you'll destroy all walls, and you'll exile this, and it will return transformed, and it becomes Jurassic Park, which is a legendary land. It gives all dinosaurs in your graveyard escape, and so escape is just, for this card specifically, the escape cost is their regular mana value. So if I have a dinosaur in my graveyard, I have to pay its mana value and then exile 3 other cards from my graveyard, and then I can just play it from graveyard, which is really good. It's really good if you have just a low mana cost dinosaur for blockers, maybe. I had it's Quinth, which is a 2-drop 2/3, and he also has an ETB trigger. But if you continuously bounce that back from your graveyard and continue to play that, you not only get the discover trigger, but you can also just have like a cheap blocker that you can return on each of your turns and still get that discover. So Works out really well. And then also it taps for green mana for each dinosaur you control. So if I have 6 dinosaurs up, I tap this guy, 6 floating green. That's pretty good. Next up, after I flip this, I have Curator of Sun's Creation. Now, I haven't actually played with this guy. I completely forgot that a card like this existed. I played with my brothers last night, and my little brother was actually like, "Hey, Seth, do you have the one guy that doubles Discover triggers?" And I was like, "No, I don't." But it turns out I looked it up on my Archie deck, and I did have it, so I put that in there. It's just gonna double or an additional time. For the same value nonetheless. So if I discover for 5 off of Pantlaza, and since Pantlaza only does it once per turn, it's still good, but you know, like, you do want that other discover. So if I discover for 5, I do it once off of Pantlaza, and then this will trigger it again, and so I'll discover 5 twice, which is pretty insane. Pugnacious Hammerskull, it's great. It's a 3-drop for a 6 toughness, so you get to 6 discover, and like if you have Grumgully or Rhythm of the Wild out, that's another 1 or 2 more discover. So it's really, really good value. Atali Primal Storm, good dinosaur. Same with Trumpeting Connoisseur. It's just they're good pieces, and Atali will take the weight off of Pantlaza's back, you know, being a target. Trumpeting Carnosaur not only gets for 6-drop a 6 discover, but it also discovers 5 when it enters. So when this enters, if it's your first dinosaur you cast this turn, you'll get 2 discovers off of it. And if you happen to have Curator of Sun's Creation off of it, you're going to discover 4 times off of casting this one dude, which is pretty crazy. And then finally, we've got some finishers for the deck. So first off, we've got Mage Slayer. This is just going to make it so when you attack, equipped creature will immediately deal damage equal to its power to the planeswalker or player it is attacking. So if I have a, you know, say if I got Galta out, I've equipped Galta with this guy. I swing with Galta, the guy immediately, whoever I'm swinging at, immediately takes 12 damage. Now, that's pretty busted. Early game, it's not too crazy, but it is just great damage to have. And then I do have Galta, as well as Galta and Mavrin. Just great cards. Galta's great to have. You know, I get a decent amount of dinosaurs out early game. And then for little to no mana, only 2 mana really, I'll cast Galta and then discover 12, which could be a 1-drop. It could be an 8-drop. Still, it's pretty good. Then we've got Galta and Mavrin. Whenever I attack, I can create a dinosaur, which is on base power toughness XX, where X is the greatest number or greatest power of creatures I'm attacking with. Yeah. And then Zatalpa, Primal Dawn, which is just big finisher, big dinosaur. Yeah. But yeah, that is my dinosaur deck. I really enjoy playing it. I've had Pantlaza basically since Ixalan, Lost Caves of Ixalan came out, and I've been like just waiting to, you know, build up my dinosaur catalog so I can actually build this deck. And I've actually like went through my entire collection, grabbing dinosaurs, putting them together, and trying to build this like 3 or 4 times before I finally did. But yeah, I just got the, you know, cardboard kick, and I built 2 decks in one night, and this is one of them, and I'm really proud of it. It plays really well. I can't wait to see what happens when I go back to school and play with my buddies. I think they'll love to hate it and hate to love it. But yeah, that's about it. Hope you like it. Have a good one.